Hi everybody, we're moving along with some mega-sized plans and a bit of a different format for episode 48. Since I plan on placing and installing most, if not all, of the mega factories in this video, I'm expecting it to be especially time-consuming and long. So for the sake of time, efficiency, and my own personal enjoyment, we will be starting with some sped-up clips of the building process with some commentary as appropriate along the way. Then we'll meet back up here when it's all said and done for the walkthrough. So enjoy the music and the clips. I'm gonna go get to work and I'll see you when it's done. I started off by knowing I had to solve 3 questions. The first being, where was I going to place my rail network? The second, what type of rail network would it be? And thirdly, where will my factories fit within the base? I came to my answers by looking at the base and trying to visualize where everything would go and logistically planning the best routes for the train network. I stuck with my goal of trying to have the same types of trains fit within one pair of tracks if possible. So for instance, that would mean I would have copper trains on one pair of tracks, iron on another, plastic on yet another pair of tracks, and so on and so on, which meant I needed many pairs of tracks to accommodate everything. Once I had a couple ideas in mind, I went to setting down train tracks as you can see in these clips here. This process actually took a few iterations. The first attempt had the tracks much too close to the base, which didn't leave room for any of the factories to fit between the tracks and the circles, so that got ripped up and replaced. Once I had the bare bones of the rail network placed, I set to work finding what I considered to be the middle on the left-hand side of the base, and used that as a reference for where I would fit the tracks coming out of the copper and iron smelting factories. I then proceeded to place the smelting factories, starting with copper. I placed the copper factory only to realize I hadn't made a stacker system yet, so I went back to creative mode, lined up and measured a 2-locomotive 4-wagon stacker, and then replaced it back in the vanilla map. Bottom line, there were multiple versions of the track and factory setups that started out only to get ripped up and replaced with what became the end result. After the rail network and smelting factories were placed, I started to play with where I was going to fit the other factories that would eventually get used for science. This included finishing current projects like blue circuits, but also working on new projects like oil refineries going into plastic and rocket fuel, coal and stone swapping areas, low-density structures, Speed 1 modules, rocket control units. There's also probably a couple more factories I'm forgetting to mention. There were many times I disabled my personal RoboPort though, placed down the ghosted blueprints of these factories, and then I decided if I liked how it fit or not before letting my construction bots finish the job. The really tricky part was trying to think out what could fit where while still planning for things like train loading and unloading stations and their stackers, especially when some of the factories were reliant on each other. It made sense for me to fit my low-density structures near a high-throughput plastic, steel, and copper area, for example, but I also wanted to make sure I had most of my fluid-requiring products like plastic and rocket fuel near each other since they shared a lot of the same fluids. So it's a fine line between where do I fit stuff because it physically fits here, and where do I fit stuff because it makes sense. Once all of the rails and factories were made, it was time for me to install all of the respective train loading and unloading stations, their stackers, belt balancers, and then rail signals and all of the other odds and ends that go into making a factory work. This was a very tedious process that I'm still not even fully finished with. After 3 weeks working on these projects with many weekends consumed by very little else besides Factorio, I can now safely say that the bulk of the installation stage is finally done. So let's move on to the reveal. And now, after literally hours and hours and hours of working on this, it is time for the grand reveal. But let's start with reminding you guys of here is the before picture, and now here is the after. What a huge difference. So right off the bat, you'll notice that now we have tons of rail tracks laid throughout the base. They take on kind of a square shape or rectangular shape, what have you. They're not 100% symmetrical because I actually have more rails up here on this line than I do on the sides and down here at the bottom, which will explain the reasoning behind in just a minute here. And then of course, the other big difference is that we have the addition of tons of new factories. These are the majority of the factories that I will need for the megabase or 1,000 signs per minute goal. To explain the big ones right off the bat, we have copper smelting over here to the bottom left. We have iron plate smelting right above that. We have steel smelting, which is this humongous smelting factory over here to the right. Below that, we have a stone brick drop-off a stone ore drop-off and a stone brick smelting area just over here with some stone miners already tapped into. And then over here to the top middle, we have an array of factories. We have oil, and I think this is just refineries over here to the far left. We've got a parking lot, checkpoint, drop-off, train station thing, just like we have established through a couple episodes ago. That's still the same over here. This will drop off some oil products and some other things, and we'll get to what train stations drop off where in just a minute here. Then we have more refineries in this area for plastic, and we also have coal drop off as well. And more refineries yet again over here that will be converting crude oil into the 3 oil fluid products that will be going into rocket fuel. About 2/3 of the oil products will be going into light oil, and then the other third will be petroleum, and those products will convert the fuel into solid fuel, and from there the solid fuel will go into the rocket fuel. The heavy oil gets cracked back into light oil. And then next to the rocket fuel area, we have rocket parts. Below that, I actually fit in the Speed 1 module factory, and this used to be where that snaking artillery train setup was originally, but I got rid of that, and I think instead we'll place that over here, hence why I have this little icon over here to the far right. So we'll do something like that and make like a humongous artillery train if we want to in the future. And then right next to the rocket part factory, we have a low density structure factory. We've got some more train drop-off checkpoint part things here. This one looks a little bit different because we're going to be having an additional train station drop-off here, which we'll also get to a little bit later. And then that covers all of the new factories. You'll also notice that I have a couple other icons located throughout the map here. We've got these little information or eye icons here, 2 here and 2 over here. I'm thinking eventually we will make these into either some parking lots for some train stations if we need overflow. And then the other option is that we could make this like a solar panel array just vertically in like a column here and then over here. And then these little O's here to the very bottoms of the base are going to be for outpost trains. What I mean by that is that eventually we'll have outpost trains where they trains stop here, they pick up a ton of supplies, so artillery shells, ammo, light oil for flamethrower turrets and stuff like that. We'll pick up bots and repair packs, and they will take them to the perimeters of the base for defensive purposes, because right now the logistic network is all just one big thing essentially, and I want to eventually change that so that way we have maybe north, west, south, and east parts of the factory where we're going to have outpost trains deliver supplies to those areas, and we can keep the logistic networks a bit smaller so that the bots can travel a little bit more easily throughout the areas. So that covers everything from a distance, but let's actually get into my personal train and we will travel to each factory explaining everything. So this part of the base should look pretty familiar to those of you who have been following the series for a while, but this part is a little bit different. This only used to be a personal train station prior to me working hours and hours on this new transformation, but since then I've also added in a fuel train stop area, and the idea is that this is going to be a train that will deliver to the factories around the base that need it. And instead of having trains come here to one central location, the fuel train goes to them. The other thing that's new before we even really leave the base is that I outfitted the Blue Circuit factories with their additional oil counterparts. So we're going to be having crude oil get dropped off from above, like I mentioned just a couple minutes ago. But the crude oil will come into these refineries, and from here the refineries will just use basic oil processing to convert that crude oil into petroleum, and the petroleum will either turn into plastic over here or into sulfuric acid over here, and then from there that will 100% supply all of the oil or acid needs and plastic needs for the Blue Circuit factories here, and it's mirrored also over here to the left. So it's identical, just flipped. But now, let's go ahead and get into that personal train. We'll head over to the copper smelting area first. So we made it over here to the copper smelting area. This really should look identical to the overview I discussed a couple episodes ago when we created the smelting factories. The only difference is that it was partly turned on when the bots were in a shared logistic network doing the construction process, and then therefore I had extra copper ore in storage that got delivered to the requester boxes here, and that ore turned into copper plate once smelted. But the big difference is that I have the addition of a train stacker system. So this top set of stackers, this is for the trains coming in from the main rail network over here, which we'll talk about in just a second, to pick up the copper plate. And then this stacker system over here to the bottom are for trains coming in to drop off the copper ore. Now looking here a little bit more closely, you'll notice that I have a couple pairs of tracks outside of the main base here. These are for ore delivery trains. So imagine a copper ore train coming from this line here. It'll come in this way through this stacker system, drop off the copper ore, and then it goes back on its way back into the copper mining area. How I've had this design is that the ore delivery trains as well as the plate pickup trains will never actually share any lines with each other. They're all going to be separate because I have a very non-traditional train network, which I suppose we better get to before we get much further. So you'll notice that instead of having just like a normal pair of tracks or even 4 tracks with 2 going in each direction, I have, let's see, 8 tracks here. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yes, 8 tracks up here, and I think I have even more up here. It's either like 10 or 12 up here at the top. And the reason for that is because, like I have over here to the little mini base setup, I wanted to keep the tracks as separated as possible from miscellaneous trains that would be sharing the tracks. So for instance, this pair of tracks here that I'm standing in between is going to be solely for a personal train and my fuel trains. Only those trains will ever be able to get on this set of tracks. One way I can guarantee that is that I was only able to set in some of the train tracks connected to only this line. So even though other trains, like if I told a train up here to go on this line, it physically could not because there would be no way for that train to get on this set of tracks. Within this pair of tracks is where I'm going to be having copper trains. So this will be full copper plate trains as well as empty copper plate trains, either coming or going. This pair of tracks here is going to be for plastic. And then this last pair of tracks here is going to be for iron plate, either empty or full. And then I do have this as right-hand drive, so that means trains will be coming from the bottom and going up, and those are usually going to be the full trains, although it really could vary depending on what angle you're looking at. But the idea with this left-hand side of the base is that primarily it's just going to be copper, plastic, and iron plate trains within this territory over here. So with these train stops, I'm going to be having, let's see, plastic drop-off, copper drop-off, and iron plate drop-off. And it's really the same up here as it is down here. So that will help to distribute my trains a little bit more cleanly, hopefully, by limiting congestion of trains that don't need to go in this area, because it'll be primarily just the three products that I said, copper plate, iron plate, and plastic within this area over here. So we also have the fuel drop-off train right here. That isn't actually working yet, but I think it'll work. We've got the fuel train that will be coming off this area over here and into this kind of stacker system, but only the fuel train will be in this line, although it looks like I'm missing a signal. Good thing I caught that. And then the copper ore trains drop off the ore in these stations here. The copper plate is picked up in these stations above. Meanwhile, the copper plate, instead of going down, it will go up and then snake back around over here to the right and make their way back onto the main copper rail network. I have a similar design as well for iron plate. The only difference is that it's kind of flipped. So on the bottom here is where I have the iron plate trains that will pick up the iron plate. And wow, I'm glad I was over here. I'm missing a whole bunch of things. I'm even missing yet another signal there. So yeah, these will be the trains picking up the iron plate. Meanwhile, this stacker system is for the trains dropping off the iron ore, as you can see with this train station and this train all ready to go. It's only set to manual. This was one of the trains I was able to kind of mosey on over here from me demolishing track and so on during the construction process. Similar setup for picking up and dropping off ore and the plate over here. And then the iron ore trains will also make their way back onto the main ore rail network, if that makes any sense, which is, again, this line that is just beyond their perimeter defense area. One thing I tried to keep in mind was I actually had to move the defensive walls to the east and west a couple times to make room, because the smelting systems have their own private logistic network, and they wouldn't work without their own private logistic network. So right now there's 500 bots within each of the copper and iron plate smelters. There's 1,000 bots in the steel, but I do intend to at least make the cap 1,000 for all of the smelters for now. So I have to wait on a couple more logistic bots to get built. But this network is separate from this network now, which I had to do that by moving this literally over just by a couple tiles. But the other thing I was going to mention is that even though these flamethrower turrets are not hooked into light oil currently, I wanted to make sure that my tracks were actually outside of the flamethrower turret range, because that is a lesson I've learned the hard way, is that if you have it too close like I do over here, you end up with some lit on fire train tracks, which is not what I want. We may end up redoing the defensive perimeter eventually, but for now, I was content to just move them left or right. But it was quite tedious waiting for the bots to do that. So I guess I've just abandoned my personal train at this point, and we'll head on to the upper tracks. So this is where it's getting a little bit more complicated with how the tracks are set up, and this is partly what took so long for the planning process, was because I had to mentally think about how I was going to do this and visualize it and all of those details. So again, this pair of tracks is for fuel and my personal train. This pair of tracks is still for copper. This pair of tracks is still for plastic. This pair of tracks is still for iron. But then we have this pair of tracks, which is the new addition of tracks, and this is going to be for coal and for crude oil coming in. And so the coal and crude oil actually branch off here and get outside of the walls, and that's where we're going to be having the mining trains come in and drop off their products. But those snake around here and come to their first drop-off point, which is off this line here. Now you'll see all of these signals. I would say I'm pretty comfortable with signaling rails, but I've never had it this complicated before, so I won't be surprised if I am missing a signal or two that we'll find out inevitably down the line. But those branch off here. We've got a little stacker here for some of the crude oil train drop-offs. We've got the typical setup I use for distributing the crude oil off of the cargo wagons here, or the fluid wagons or whatever. And then those get distributed into these refineries. We have 7 columns by 3, so 21 refineries here. And those will all convert crude oil via basic oil processing into petroleum. And those get piped all the way from left to right past this train cargo checkpoint thingy into the plastic area over here. So the plastic will use the petroleum from the left. It will get the coal from the top section over here. And this is actually where we're going to be using a coal swap area, kind of like I used in my 0.16 series, and how I'm using also over here at the bottom. So here's a good visualization of how it's going to actually work once it's up and running, is that we're going to have multiple trains drop off the coal, and then that way we can also have a train pick up coal and take it to other parts of the base that needs it, but also from here coal gets distributed downwards and to the plastic chemical plants that need it. And then this train station here is going to be for the plastic pickup. I've got tons of balancers, and you can tell I've been using tons of Blue Underground belts. This is definitely not a cheap build. It was very expensive for the entire thing. You'll also notice that I have this kind of weird belt reading set up over here, and this is to allow the plastic to go from bottom to left over here so that the plastic can feed into the cars and then therefore feed the red circuit factory over here that will need the plastic. But otherwise, the majority of this plastic will feed into this train plastic pickup point over here to deliver it to other parts of the base that need it, like low density structures. But when we do have an overflow of plastic, as read on these belts, the plastic will instead divert from the left side of the lines and go northwards, and that will help to improve the efficiency and compression of the plastic on the belts feeding into this train station here. Now moving on to rocket fuel. This is a very similar setup that I had in my 0.16 series. Of course, there is a bit of a recipe change, so compared to 0.16, the assemblers that go into actually making the rocket fuel also now not only require solid fuel, but they require fuel as well, or light oil. So that is why I have slight modifications to this. We're missing some cars, which unfortunately I don't have any in me, but cars will go in these little areas here, so that's something that I will install a little bit later on. And then, like I said a couple minutes ago, about 2/3 of these assemblers, or chemical plants, excuse me, are going to be converting light oil into solid fuel, and then the other third of the chemical plants are going to be using petroleum to make solid fuel. But that way we can balance the fluids a little bit better, and then all of the heavy oil that is made within these refineries here will get cracked back into light oil, which is these chemical plants here. I also have some tanks here for storage purposes. It also allows me to kind of read and balance the fluids a little bit better. I don't have them hooked up into any combinators at the point though, because I think this should balance it pretty well. But when I do want to come and actually test this, if I see that it's not working properly, I can just hover over it and read how much of each fluid is in the system at any given time. We have the same crude oil drop-off point at this section over here, and another mini stacker for crude oil trains coming in. And now moving on to the right side is where we have the rocket control unit production with the Speed 1 modules getting produced right below that. So instead of walking all the way over there, we'll get into map view. Like I said earlier, this is where the artillery train used to be, but I ripped that up in favor of placing this instead because I was quickly running out of room to put all of my factories, and Speed 1 modules and rocket control units essentially go hand in hand. So the Speed 1 module factory will get its red and green circuits off of the cars traveling along this point here, and maybe we'll pull from over here along the main circle as well, but either way, it'll come from this part of the lines For the red and green circuits, it'll feed into the Speed 1 module factories here. And from there, the Speed 1 modules will spit out. We'll have to move some belts and stuff like that. But anyway, it'll go, instead, the Speed 1 modules up here to the top. We'll also get blue circuits coming from the cars as well, which will divvy up from points along here. And then from there, rocket control units will get produced. And those, if you can tell, will get put into this train station up here. This train station will pick up all three things needed for the rocket. It will pick up rocket fuel, it will pick up low density structures, and it will pick up the rocket control units. The only thing it will not pick up is the satellite, which gets produced separately, although I suppose we could add that in the future and make it, you know, a fourth cargo wagon for the purpose of picking up the satellite. But that's something to think about later. The rocket fuel output comes from here and snakes around, and then that leads us to the low density structures, which is right nearby. This we've talked about earlier when I created the low density structure factory. It will pick up its plastic and copper from these train stations over here. This one drops off plastic, this one drops off steel, and then copper is dropped off here. Yes, in this train station. So all of those three products get messily distributed to where they need to go, and then the output for the low density structures makes its way back up here, like I said, to the rocket parts pickup train where it picks up again all three products. We've got another mini stacker here, and then we've got an additional crude oil drop-off point here because the crude oil will eventually need to make its way down to other parts of the base that need it. In particular, I'm already trying to plan ahead and put in some refineries here for science that will be going into producing some batteries that we're going to be needing, as well as maybe we can do a little bit of plastic for the low density structures here instead of having an entirely different plastic drop-off point or distributing it any more messily. But that's something we can think about a little bit later, but at least having the additional crude oil drop-off point here will at least help with batteries in the future. So I'm already thinking ahead. We've talked a little bit about these train drop-off points here for plastic, steel, and copper. We also have, I want to say this is iron plate. No, actually this is coal drop-off here. And the coal and all of these other products will also get distributed into these boxes that will have to get turned into requester chests. And from there, just like we have enacted down here, bots will help supply the materials into those boxes and then into the trains. So at this point, the distribution of train tracks got a little bit messy. Ooh, and I'm putting down signals, it looks like. I'll deal with that later. But it got a little bit messy with how I distributed the train lines because I ended up needing to share some of these lines a little bit. Because you might be wondering, where is the steel line? Well, I'm actually having it so that at about somewhere in this point, the old plastic line or the old iron plate line becomes the steel line or something like that. I can't even keep track of it. It's such a complicated, messy thing, but I did do a lot of preparation for it, and bottom line, at some point, in fact, I think it's this one here. Yes. So from this line on, or from this point on to the right, it becomes the steel train, even though from this point on, it's the iron train or something like that. So just trust me that I'm hopefully going to have it work properly. And then that leaves this empty area down here that kind of looks a little bit empty on the map, which is why I want to put something here just to make it more evened out, so to speak. But this will become an artillery train or something like that. And then let's make our way over to steel and stone, and then we'll be wrapping up the video any minute. Okay, here's the steel smelting factory. Looks pretty identical to the other factories, and we went over the steel smelting setup a couple episodes ago as well, but here it is. It was also, again, partly turned on when we had some excess iron ore in the logistics system, but we don't actually have any active trains working yet, but that will be very soon. It is a giant thing, and it looks like it's not even fully done yet, which I didn't even realize, so good thing we walked by here. But that's steel. We're going to be having an iron ore train come in as well and drop off iron ore, which will convert the iron ore into the iron plate, and the iron plate will turn directly into the steel. So there's not going to be any actual iron plate trains coming in, just iron ore trains coming in. We have a similar system here for steel pickup and a fuel drop-off point, and we also have this train station here is a personal train, so you'll notice all of the smelting areas have a train stop for my personal train. So that's how I'm going to be getting to and from the far out areas of the base. This also is its own private logistic network. There's 1,000 bots currently in it. We can add more if needed. And then heading past here, we're going to make our way to the stone ore drop-off point, as well as the stone brick smelting area. And actually, these 20 smelters is all I need to produce the stone brick needed for 1,000 signs per minute. So this is as small as it needs, which means that this area I have over here for the stone brick smelting is probably a bit overkill, but I didn't know at the time. But that's okay. So stone ore will get smelted here, but we also have some stone ore drop-off points here just to provide a centralized location for trains that just need the raw ore to pick it up from here instead of having to go all the way to different mining areas. And now we're back to the tracks that will feed into the bottom right portion of the train station checkpoint drop-off thingy here. These pair of tracks are going to be for rocket part drop-off. These ones here I think are for stone and stone brick, and then we've also got another pair of tracks just for a miscellaneous train if needed, because I'm trying to plan for things to go wrong or for miscellaneous things that I'm not taking into account. So I am trying to think ahead. But eventually, between this train and car checkpoint system here, here, and here, I'm hoping that we'll have all of the products that we need get distributed to science factories that are already here in the middle, as was established tons of episodes ago. And then as far as circuits are concerned, we're not going to be having any trains drop-off circuits, but those will be delivered into the cars going in this circle here, and those cars will travel and make their way into this circle. So there you have it. Obviously a huge transformation between the start of the episode and now. It was just innumerous hours spent doing this, and I'm sorry I couldn't devote live time to each little project, but there was so much finesse involved and literally just time devoted to moving stuff over by a tile and waiting on bots and things like that, that I hope you can understand why this wasn't caught live or like 100% on camera. So I hope you guys will forgive me for that, but I'm really excited about this because now it truly feels like we're moving back into mega base territory, whereas before at the start of the episode, the entire factory was really just supporting modules, which was this area over here, but now we have potential to support more. We're getting to the point where we can start turning science on. So we're going to be turning stuff on in the next couple of episodes, and I hope to be doing a couple live streams so you guys can actually join me live for that. So if you're not already following me on Twitch, please do so, because that is where I do my live streams. I'm hoping to do one here very soon to be turning this stuff on, so I hope you guys will join me for that. In the meantime, let me know what you think of this humongous base transformation. I can't wait to hear what you guys think, and I'll be seeing you soon for episode 49.